Japan just began the new year with a very impressive display of its military capabilities. The 1st Airborne Brigade of the Self Defense Forces carried out an exercise in which they jumped out of airplanes, propelled out of helicopters, and showed that they could fight alongside ground vehicles as well. But what's particularly interesting about this event was that Japan wasn't alone. They were joined by their military friends, not just allies, but a variety of countries that wanted to show their flags on the field alongside Japan. Hello, I'm Jeffrey Hall, and welcome to Japan Matters. In this video, I'm going to be talking about an example of the public relations that the Japan Self-Defense Force engages in. They hold a variety of events every year, and the most recent of these that caught my attention was the New Year Jump in Indo-Pacific 25. It was an airborne demonstration held by the 1st Airborne Brigade on Sunday, January 12th, 2025. And they call this a start of training for the new year for the airborne. And it's held every year around the same date and at the same time. For those of you who are unaware, here is an aerial image of the base where this airborne demonstration was held. As you can see, it's surrounded by city. This is in the suburbs of Tokyo and Chiba Prefecture, where Camp Narashino has this field of open space here in which they carry out this event. But it's an event that is very much one that could cause a nuisance to the neighborhood, so they're only really able to carry out this large-scale training exercise once a year, and they invite the media, they invite people to come and spectate, and they also live stream it on the internet, which leads to a lot of interesting reactions. And the most interesting reactions were to the finale of the main training when Japan's friends and allies came onto the field. So let's watch a short clip of this part of the multi-hour event. So I'm not going to talk too much over this, but here we have the beginning of the clip where these helicopters have landed and they're about to release the troops, the international troops who have come to support Japan with very dramatic music. First out is Japan's main ally, the United States, and then the like-minded countries come onto the field, some of them with just a handful of troops carrying their flags. They all prep in place so that the music can reach its most dramatic moment, and then they are sent forward with their flags waving. Some netizens reacting to this compared it to RPG boss music or some other kind of video game music, and I can certainly see the similarities. Look at all these countries carrying their flags out on the field here. There's the British guy running forward. You can see the Philippines and France there. The Americans, the largest military presence in Japan. You have Germans, you have Canadians, you have the Dutch, the Italians, the Australians, and Singapore and Poland. You can see America is sitting right next to Japan. The two big allies who are actually allied to each other are positioned together on this large line of flags across the training field at Camp Narashino. It was quite an impressive sight for the viewers in person and on the internet. There were a lot of reactions on the internet to this part of the event. Here is one from Twitter that compares the Americans as they run to the famous 12th century Japanese scroll of the Choju Giga manga. This is frolicking animals who are sort of like people as they run around, and the Americans, in their way of running, are compared to this image that almost anyone in Japan would recognize. There was also some reactions to the British soldier who, carrying his flag, ran ahead of everybody else at a much faster speed. And a lot of the Japanese netizens thought that this was particularly funny. They could see that some of the other countries were grouped together. The Americans were grouped as their own group. And then the British dude was just out in front, running with a lot of momentum. The event also inspired some fan art. This is an example of a Japanese Twitter user who made some Poland ball memes, where they have each of the countries carrying their flags. The Americans, of course, with their little sunglasses on, trying to look cool. But the British guy out in front with his flag is the biggest one standing out in this artwork. However, the most viral response to this event involved a reference to the Boxer Rebellion. This is a Japanese tweet that got over 700,000 views, in which they reacted to the flags of various nations coming alongside Japan, saying, did they come to quell the Boxer Rebellion? This user is most likely referring to the event in which a multinational army came to relieve the international legations that were under siege by an army of Chinese rebels and Chinese troops who had decided that they wanted to drive foreign imperialists out of their nation. The most well-known episode in this war involved the 55-day siege of Peking, where the various foreign legations, 11 countries had their legations in Peking, came under siege, and a motley crew of soldiers and civilians from various nations armed themselves and defended the area until troops from a multinational force could come and rescue them. This is an image here of the 8-nation army that was sent to rescue the people who were under siege in Peking. This included diplomats, it included civilians, it included Chinese Christians who had taken refuge there. And as you can see from this image, which was drawn by a Japanese artist, the Japanese take center stage. And it's not just because a Japanese person created it for a Japanese audience, it's because the Japanese were the largest portion of this army. This is an image here from Wikipedia. As you can see, it mentions that there was a force of about 22,000 troops. 10,000 of them were Japanese, so almost half of the army was Japanese. But what's really unique about this military force is that it included Russians, British, Americans, French, Germans, Austrians, and Italians. So it is one of these moments in history where you rarely see so many countries coming together. In this case, they're coming together to protect their imperial interests in China and rescue their diplomats and civilians. But it is this rare example of Japan being the lead good guy of the period, at least from the perspective of the countries that joined Japan in this 8-nation army. And you can find various examples of artwork on the internet that depict the Japanese fighting in the Boxer Rebellion. This one has, as you can see in the background, some foreign troops with their flag, and perhaps that's why the Japanese netizens who saw this military exercise in Chiba Prefecture were reminded of the Boxer Rebellion, because so many of these pictures have all these various flags to let the people looking know, hey, look at all these armies that came together to support the Japanese, or on the other hand, the Japanese who came to rescue these countries that couldn't do it for themselves. The events of the siege of Peking and the people defending it have been fictionalized in the form of the film 55 Days at Peking, or Peking no Goju Gonichi, as it's shown here as in its Japanese title on the screen, with Charlton Heston and other actors playing the defenders against the Chinese hordes, many of whom are played by white dudes dressed up like Chinese. But in this film, Although the Japanese took such a central role in rescuing the foreign missions, they don't really get very much screen time. It's mostly just the white dudes, especially Charlton Heston, of course, the main character. It's a film that depicts the Chinese as most certainly the bad guys, and the Europeans and the Japanese as the good guys. And one of the most memorable scenes of this film is when the foreign army, the Eight Nation Army, comes to liberate the legations. And you can see the soldiers of each country, whether they be Americans or Europeans, being greeted emotionally by civilians and soldiers from their respective countries. Even the Russians, who had a rather negative reputation during this period of history, are treated as good guys marching into the city. All of the Europeans coming in are treated as people who should be welcomed by the masses. But in the case of Japan, you have this scene in which the Japanese are not greeted by any civilians at all. They're just greeted by other soldiers. You could see this perhaps as a reflection of how Americans would have viewed Japan in the 1960s when this film was made. And there might be a little bit of historical reality to it, but it certainly plays into stereotypes about Japan. But this is a film that has a bit of a cult following on the internet, not just among English speakers, there are also Japanese. The tweets that I saw responding to these viral posts about the photos of the event actually called this the modern day equivalent of 55 days in Peking. Or this one on the left here says, the year is 1900. It's 55 days at Peking. If you want to learn more about the events of the Boxer Rebellion and the Siege of Peking and 55 Days at Peking, I highly recommend a YouTube video from a channel called The History Chap, where he goes into some of the details, some of the more interesting parts of this historical event. It's not a very big picture look at the war, it's more of a small micro view of what was happening. But he does go into some interesting details, including mentioning that these allied armies that came to rescue the foreigners also engaged in quite a bit of atrocities in the process. Another reason why this has been compared to the Boxer Rebellion is that that was a conflict where Japan and several Western nations fought against China. And today, in the security environment in East Asia, Japan and Western countries are cooperating because of a shared perception of threat from a rising China. So if you look at the official tweet from Japan's Ministry of Defense about this, they use a hashtag referring to the free and open Indo-Pacific, FOIP as they sometimes call it, FOIP. This is a term that came out of the Abe administration, and it is used all the time by Japan, by the United States, by other countries in the region when they want to talk about balancing against China, because China is not free, China is not open, and China is in the Indo-Pacific. But as you'll also note from this event, several of the countries involved were clearly not located in the Indo-Pacific region. Europe is not considered a part of the Indo-Pacific region, but several European countries are now seeing participation in security cooperation in this region as important for themselves, even though this is so far from home. After the exercise, several foreign embassies have shared photos of their troops participating in the event. Here is one example. It's from the Polish forces. This is a diplomat sharing an image of their paratroopers, and he's noting that this is the first time that Poland has participated in this exercise in Japan. You might think it's a bit strange for a country so far away as Poland to be cooperating with Japan here, but while this is going on in Asia, Japan is also one of the main contributors of aid to Ukraine, and that is a strategically important situation for Poland. So it would make some sense that Poland would seek out more cooperation with Japan as that is going on in Europe. This is from the French embassy's social media account. You can see here that you have two paratroopers in their photos, and they shared photos of the paradrop. They also shared photos of their paratroopers saying hello to little children, shaking hands with important officials. This was tweeted out in Japanese for a Japanese audience, and many of these were as well. And they clearly want Japanese to be aware that France is at least showing the flag there. Not a huge presence, but still showing that it cares about the region. The Germans also tweeted about this. This is the German ambassador's Twitter account. You can see here that according to her tweet, it is the second time that German soldiers have participated in this exercise. And she writes that it's demonstrating the close level of military cooperation between our countries in the Indo-Pacific. Now, Germany is not in the Indo-Pacific, but they do care about this region more because this is the second time they've participated in this event. Two nations in particular stand out for recent participation in military exercises with Japan and also other forms of security cooperation. The first of these nations is the UK. Here is a tweet from the UK's embassy, UK and Japan, and they note that this was the third time that their forces participated. They say that they look forward to further strengthening cooperation in the future, and they also made a cool little video about the exercise. The second country that I want to mention is Italy. This is actually the first time that the Italians participated in this airborne exercise for the new year, but they did it in a very special way. They actually sent their chief of staff for their army there, a paratrooper himself, and they shared through their diplomatic account photos of him at the event, photos of their troops standing together with the other troops with their flags together. And this is a big thing for Italy to be sending troops to Japan. The presence of Italians for the first time, joining the British who've been there a few times, is probably related to recent developments in other spheres of security cooperation. The most significant of these is that Japan, Italy, and the UK are working together to develop a next generation jet fighter. And this is going to be a huge project. There's already thousands of people around the world working on this jet fighter, and this jet fighter will be very important for Japan's future defense, especially when it comes to holding out against China's increasing military capabilities. Of course, there were other countries that participated in this exercise, and all of them were important in some way, especially now as Japan heads into 4 years of a Trump presidency, which will bring uncertainty and unpredictability to international relations in this region. Japan will be seeking cooperation with other friendly countries, not just the United States, more now than ever before. And China continues to rise as an adversary that Japan's government is particularly worried about. Okay, I'll end the video there for today. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing. Also, if you'd like to support this channel more, I have a Patreon page, so please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. It will really help motivate me to create more videos on a regular basis. Anyway, thanks for watching and have a great day.